We are talking about materialism, the idea that our mental life emerges from our physical brain. If you are listening closely, if you are thinking about this, I hope you acknowledge it, that this is an odd and unnatural view. I don't expect you to believe it, at least not at first. And in fact, for the most part, people are far more attracted to the doctrine called dualism. Dualism is an idea that's been found in just about every religion and every philosophy. It's made explicit in Plato, for instance. But I think the most thoughtful and articulate defender of dualism was the philosopher René Descartes. Descartes believed that animals were material things. He thought that the doctrine of materialism was correct about non-human animals. But humans are different. Descartes argued for humans their duality. They possess two sorts of things. We are composed of two sorts of things. We are in part material, but we are also in part spiritual, spirit, mental, philosophical. In some way that doesn't reduce to the material. He made two arguments for this, and they are both reasonably good arguments, at least quite persuasive at his time, and have persuaded many people and continue to persuade many people. The first argument for a non-material thing nature is that humans are capable of doing things that no machine, no material entity ever could. So it might surprise you to hear this, but Descartes in the 17th century was familiar with robots. You He knew about the French Royal Garden, which is like a 17th century Disneyland or even Disney, which had robots that tricked when you approach them or when you step on certain stones. For instance, you might approach Diana and then Neptune will jump out from the bushes holding a trident. This was done not of electricity but with water. So Descartes knew about these robots and Descartes asked, well, maybe we are such things. Maybe we are just machines responding to the environment. And he said that we can be. He said maybe animals, non-human animals can be, but human behavior is far more complicated and variegated and subtle to be explained in such simple ways. Well, turn to this point later on in the course when they talk about Noam Chomsky, and Noam Chomsky is critical of behaviorism, which argue that basically humans respond on a relativity reflexive way to be environmental stimuli. Descartes, along with Chomsky, said, "But can be. Our behavior is far too complicated for that. So we can be machines." His second argument is probably better now, and it's based on intuitions. And his claim was we don't feel like bodies. So to put it more technically, he applied that was called a method of doubt. He asked the question, what do we know for sure, and that can be questioned. So, for instance, you might believe you were born in such and so place. You could be wrong. You could be deceived. You might believe that the earth is thousands or millions of years old. But maybe the earth was created 100 years old and all the memories that your grandparents have of the past were just manufactured. You might believe, said Descartes, that you live in a world of things, that you are sitting on a chair or there a wall in front of you or there is a computer near your hands. But Descartes observed that we often believe such things, they were dreams, but weren't mistaken. He observed that people who are mentally ill or were deranged in some way might have such beliefs, but don't be mistaken. So you could be wrong that there's a physical world around you. You could be wrong that there is a body that you have. This is an ancient concept, of course, but it's best articulated in the movie The Matrix, which maintains that we think we are running around in the physical world, but actually, with the lucky exception of our heroes like Neo and Trinity, we are actually just plugged into some sort of system. Another version of this is that their brains in a death. If you're there a brain, just the brain sitting in a death with electrical wires simulations your experience, you couldn't help. Maybe you are such things. Modern day philosophers, for instance, will argue that there's an excellent chance that we are simulations, we computer simulations. So, Descartes and people following Descartes said, there's a lot of we can't be sure of. The things that we are seemingly most confident about in real world can be shaken. But Descartes says, there's one thing you can doubt. You can doubt your own consciousness. You can doubt your own existence. The famous line is, I think therefore I am. and spilling out their intuition, building from the fact you could doubt that you have a body, but you can't doubt that you have a mind, Descartes wrote. I knew that I was a substance, the full essence or nature of which is to think, and that for its existence there is no need of any place. Nor does it dependent in a material thing. That is to say, the soul by which I am that I am is entirely distinct from body. So that's a physical case for dualism. But as I say, dualism is all emerging out of common sense. Think about how you describe your body. You describe your body as you possess it. My arm, my hand, my body, my brain, as if it's something separate from you that you have, or considering your intuition about personality identity. So typically as people age, their consciousness follows the body. So I get 10 years older, my mind 10 years older, my brain is 10 years older. It all connects together. But we easily accept at least infection that people can hop from one body to another. There are many comedies that involve body switching body swims. There are movies that involve somebody games to sleep one morning as one person and waking up as another. We understand they are fiction, they aren't real, but they make sense to us. There are intuitive rationality to this. We don't walk out of the factory and say, I am totally confused that happened there. Rather, at least with our naive conception of the self, we accept at least of the possibility that you can hop from one body to another. None of this is limited to modern day movies. The most famous short story about history by Franz Kafka begins with the sentence: as Gregor Samsa awoke one morning from unusual dreams, he found himself transformed in his bed into a gigantic insect. Metamorphosis involved the transformation, and long before that, in Ulysses, the characters are transformed. Some of the characters are transformed by an evil witch into pigs. It's none of you took to people and turned them into pigs. Rather, it's much worse. They put them in the body of pigs. As the passage goes, they had their head and voice and bristles and body of swine, but their minds remained unchanged as before. So they were painted their being. Our conception that bodies and cells are separate allow us to accept the idea you had many people inhabited one body. This is how many people think about multiple personality disorder, something we'll get to quite later of course. It's also at the root of a view at many people, both religious and non-religious hold, which is the idea of demonic possession. Your body can be taken over by somebody else. Another manifestation of dualism is you could believe in intelligent beings without bodies. If mind and body are separate, it raises the possibility you could have one without the other. Plainly, you got to the have bodies without minds. That's that a corpse is. But the argument goes, you could also have minds without bodies. This is, for instance, that many people think about God or angels, which are the immaterial beings that can think, that can observe, that can act, but they don't have physical bodies in the same sense that we do. Finally, and maybe most important for people, the idea that of dualism, the idea you are not your physical body, raises that must be for many and incredibly appealing consequence, which is that you can survive the destruction of the body. In fact, if you ask most people, religious and non-religious, that will happen after your body is destroyed, the answer is not well, I'm dead then, that's it. It's the end of things, but rather the belief is that you can live on. Maybe you will end up in some spirit world. Maybe you will ascend to heaven. If you are unlucky, maybe you will descend to hell. Maybe you are occupy some other body is a reincarnation. But the idea is that the destruction of your body need not be the destruction of your because you are not your body. All of these beliefs, the beliefs about personality identity, the beliefs about life after death, about the existence of supernatural beings, about God, all rest at least to some extent on a dualist perspective. So materialism, which say dualism is just plain wrong, is an audacious view and should be treated as such. You should just shrug and write it down. You should grab with it. you should worry about it. You should either be drunkenly accepted or fine against it. So, why are modern day psychologists and neuroscientists so confident that dualism is mistaken? Well, there are a few problems with it. One is that it simply doesn't help us explain certain things that need to be explained. Appealing to an immaterial world, to an immaterial soul, seems to duck certain questions that really do deserve an answer. So, throughout this course, we ask questions like how do we learn language? What do we find sexually attractive? How does memory work? There are questions about ourselves, about our minds. To say, oh, it all happens some immaterial realm, leaves us hopeless when it comes to answering them. The second concern is that at the time, Descartes was correct to infer from the limitations of material things physical things, that we probably are not physical things. But we now we have a much better understanding that physical things can do, which makes it actually possibly for many of us that we are such things. So I'm thinking for instance of computers and robots. For Descartes, the idea that a physical thing can do something as complicated as play a game of chess will seem ludicrous. But now, of course, we know that physical things, and if you are looking in at a computer, you are looking at such a physical thing, can do exactly that. They can understand language, they could recognize objects, they could store things in memory, they can make inferences and so on. Now, for some of these things, they don't do it anything near as well as people do. So, when we talk about language development, for instance, we see that a 2 years old child uses and understands language better than any computer around. So, we need to bear that in mind. But still, it's no longer not to say that physical thing can do all the rich and physiological diverses and physiologically complicated things that people do, which means that we have to take seriously the claim that we are in fact such physical things. That final consideration is that there's tremendous evidence that the brain is in fact the roots of mental life. So put aside all the physiological abstract arguments, there's just tons of direct evidence. To some extent that direct evidence has always been there. You don't have to be born in the 20th or 21st centuries to appreciate that getting hit in the head could after your consonants and your memory. To appreciate that diseases like syphilis can lead to description of the will and of consonants. Alzheimer's can rob you of your rationality. That coffee and alcohol can inflame the passions. It just is so evident in everyday life that physical events that affect the brain can affect ourselves, suggesting that at the very least, our mental life is intimately connected to the brain. Over recent years, something else has happened, which is the development technologies that allows us to talk directly into the brain, look at the brain actually activation and infer from patterns of the brain activation that people are thinking. So very crudely, you can put somebody into a scanner and fMRI scanner. You could tell whether or not are thinking about language or music or sex. The technology is increasing. There is such a point that is not implacable that the sum of your by the time you are listening to this, we can put a sleeping person under a fMRI scanner and know from neural patterns of neural things. No, that's their dreaming. All of this I think it's very difficult to keep with his mind and hold on to the view of dualism. I think materialism, however uncomfortable, however unpalatable, is a view that science forces us to adopt.